We're here to discuss sexual violence prevention and how all of us can become part of fundamental change through changing our narrative. First, let's examine the scope of the epidemic. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, along with RAINN, which is Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, every 73 seconds an American citizen is sexually assaulted. Every 9 minutes that victim is a child, and 1 out of every 10 victims are male. Furthermore, out of every 1,000 rapes, 995 perpetrators will walk free. How can this be? Let's break it down. Only 230 of those are ever reported to police. 2 of the primary reasons that victims don't report is fear of not being believed, along with self-blame. From there, 46 lead to an arrest. This is a crime that's very difficult to prove and rarely has witnesses. 5 cases get referred to a prosecutor, and 4.6 on average lead to incarceration, often due to plea deals for those offenders. So how can we become part of prevention through changing the narrative? First, remove the idea of sex from sexual violence. By removing the stigma and shame related to that 3-letter word, we begin becoming part of the solution. Second, it's not one act with a starting and ending point. So what is it then? 3 distinct phases. First is enabling. In our everyday conversations about current events, for example, speaking in terms of victim blaming, for example, these are part of phase 1, enabling. Second is the specific act of aggression committed by the perpetrator, usually with the victim being the only witness. The third phase is the aftermath. This is when the victim attempts to tell someone, such as a family or friend or law enforcement, or when the victim shuts down in silence. When a perpetrator is not held accountable in the aftermath, we circle back into phase 1. And it becomes a vicious cycle. We watch this unfold on the national stage multiple times, with Bill Cosby, for example, and Larry Nassar. Those are national examples that we've watched unfold. They accumulated dozens of victims before they were ever held accountable. The third way that we can become part of positive change is by asking who is a potential offender as opposed to who is a potential victim. So who is a potential offender? Understand that there is no personality disorder or disease that leads to this type of offending. Yes, there are some disorders that are more prominent among these type of offenders. However, there are other people with those same disorders who are not perpetrators. Therefore, when we understand the cultural influences, we become better equipped for change. So who is a potential offender? Research on this topic did not even begin until the 1970s, and since that time, 3 distinct types of offenders have continuously resurfaced, each with subtypes. The first is power-driven. Those who are motivated to commit this crime due to their power that they can exude over the victim. Examples are physical strength, socioeconomic power, or other types of physical power that they can inflict upon their victim. Second is anger-driven. These type of offenders release anger upon the victim. It can also include specific retaliation or revenge acts against a specific victim. And the third is sadistic. These type of offenders may be influenced by pornography, for example. The commonality among all types of offenders is manipulation. Examples include lying to the victims about their age, using charm, charisma, and trust to lure victims and enablers, along with providing drugs and alcohol to the victims with or without the victim's knowledge. A research article was done in 2008 by Pardue and Arrigo where they spoke in great detail about these types of offenders. Let's use a real-world example. A family in Brazoria County, Texas, allowed us to use this example as long as we didn't use their name. This case was also featured on Forensic Files, the nationally televised show. A 12-year-old girl we'll refer to as D was dropped off in a church parking lot by a family member for Bible study. A man approached her and offered to help her find her way. Instead, he kidnapped her, put her in his van, and drove her away to a secluded location where he repeatedly assaulted her. Next, he put her back in the van, drove to his family home, and had dinner with his wife and child as she was tied up in the van. He did this for the sole purpose of creating a future alibi into his timeline. Manipulation. After dinner, he drove her back to the secluded location where he continued to assault her, but allowed her to live, and dropped her off on a deserted street. She was later discovered and brought to the police station. However, the police did not believe her story. They sent her home without a rape kit. The next day, her family brought her back into the police station and noticed her red marks still on her wrist from being bound with duct tape the day before. As a result of that small amount of evidence, along with her detailed testimony, they were able to hold the perpetrator accountable. So how do we become part of a prevention area, through our narrative, in the aftermath? Understand the power of your words when you speak in terms of how the offender manipulated the victim, as opposed to asking questions such as, why did the victim trust him? Or, this really seems too unbelievable. Or, what was the victim wearing? When you ask these type of questions and speak in terms of the victim as opposed to the perpetrator, you become part of the process of shutting the victim down. So, in summary, how do we become part of prevention through changing the narrative? First, remove that three-letter word from your thought process and from the conversation. Secondly, remember the three phases: enabling, active aggression, and aftermath. And third, recognize the three types of offenders: power-driven, anger-driven, and sadistic. Understand that you are part of the cultural change. Thank you for your time.